Welcome to the review of the All In Podcast, episode 174. I'm Don Pateau, founder of JoyForge Labs, and I'm going to be giving you a shortened version of the latest All In Podcast episode. So, the first major topic is inflation. Inflation has been staying higher than expected. It was supposed to come down in January, it didn't. February, still didn't. And now in March, it looks like the trend is definitely that inflation is being sticky and staying high. So what does this mean for interest rate decreases? Well, they've been pushed out from April to June to nobody knows when. And now it's a big guess as to when the Fed will actually drop interest rates. It has huge impacts on other parts of the economy. Interestingly, even Larry Summers says it could potentially be the case that interest rates go up in the short term before they continue to go down. So Sachs mentions another part of Larry Summers' work, which is that if you include debt payments as part of CPI, it went as high as 18% sometime last year and peaked then and is still coming down. We don't include debt payments anymore into inflation for reasons that, we have other data points that sometimes are better to explain how inflation is working. Remember, this is an election year, so interest rates staying higher for longer is going to worsen the economy and make it more difficult for Biden to get re-elected. Sachs mentions there are going to be some other populist moves, perhaps cancelling student debt. That may come back again. All of those are going to look to be coming on board this year. However, this does impact the national debt, and this was the next most important part of the discussion. Right now, interest costs alone are $1.6 trillion, and there will be something like $7.6 trillion of the debt maturing, which now needs to get refinanced. If interest rates stay higher, that's going to make the interest costs even worse. The US now spends much more on interest payments than they do on national defense. This is a big problem. It's ballooning. It's getting out of control. Something needs to be done about the national debts. And taking a broader perspective, it might be that interest rates never go back to the low 2 or 3%. If you look at historically, it reached a peak of around 18% in the 1980s and has steadily come down since then, going to zero after the global financial crisis. But we could now go into a phase where interest rates stay higher for longer and perhaps increase over the long term. This has serious implications for equities or investment into companies because essentially the hurdle rates that you're going to need in order to make your money back is going to be that much higher. That's going to restrain the value of equities in the medium term. Another area of the economy that's taking a hit because of the higher interest rates is commercial real estate. Many buildings are in a bad situation. We're probably hoping to refinance with lower interest rates, but because they're not coming anytime soon, we're going to see a lot more distressed sales like this building, which was sold for $3.5 million, but in 2006 was worth $205 million. We may see a lot more of this happening in the short term. Now, the second big topic was AI and its interaction with copyright. Now, if we take a step back, AI uses inputs from other people, websites, videos, and the people who've provided that initial input for training are considering themselves as copyright owners and that the AI models should pay them something. Right, in this case, we're talking about 200 artists who have filed a lawsuit and they are wanting to get paid for the music that they've produced that's now included in the models built. Friedberg's very passionate about this subject, that he's quite convinced you cannot be expected to identify all the information that you use in building a model, because essentially the model is just like a human. It learns. Anybody who would learn a song or learn chords and play something new can't be expected to pay the original artist because now I've created a new work. And so this is part of the debate that went on. I think Sachs does the best job of reviewing all the different viewpoints and what the implications of those are. So here we go. Take it away, David Sachs.
Look, I think there's three potential outcomes here, okay? Outcome number one is that Friedberg wins and the courts decide that this is fair use and these AI companies aren't in violation
and copyright
of rights.
Infringement is measured in the work of art that is produced, not in the process by which it is generated.
Right. Okay. So that's solution number one. I think solution or outcome number two is that the courts throw a big wrench into it, or a bill like Schiff's bill, which is largely punitive, throws a big wrench into it. And I think what happens then is new AI companies have a really hard time accumulating training data. And so the incumbents who already have all the training data, they may have to pay a fine. There'll be some slap on the wrist. But now you've created a real moat and barrier to entry And so secretly, they're going to love it. And it's going to be a big problem, I think, for the open source movement. So that's outcome number 2. And then outcome number 3 is you create some sort of rights clearinghouse, kind of like exists in the recording industry, where if you want to cover somebody's song or perform somebody else's song, there's already predefined terms on which you can use those rights. And then there's a compensation mechanism for that. So you don't have to go negotiate every single deal that you want to do. You can just use the song, you can use the rights, and there's, again, compensation for that.
Chamath refers to this article where it's now been shown that OpenAI has used over 1 million hours of YouTube recordings to be able to train their new model. And the question is, why isn't Google going after them? And if Google, a big player, doesn't go after them, man, how are all the small players and content creators ever going to have a chance of winning a court case? Of course, Google itself has got some incentives, maybe not to do this, because they want to perhaps use all of that content themselves to create new models. It's going to be very difficult to see how the future is going to work out. If there's not a big player in this market who's going to take on these AI models and try and get the side of content creators into that picture, we're not sure how this is going to turn out. Now on to the final topic number 3, which is drones being used in warfare. They just showed an image here of a drone going and attacking this tank. So especially in Ukraine recently, we've seen drones being used very effectively, and even groups like the Houthis are using pretty cheap attack drones to have a pretty devastating effect. And now the debate is shifting to, well, what does the future of warfare look like? The topic here mostly focused actually around on investment into this. Should Silicon Valley, should venture capitalists be investing in companies? And then what are the implications of that? Of course, there's moral implications. Should you be investing in things which can kill people, or is it about defense? It turns out that both Chamath and David Sachs have invested in companies that make type of drone or drone defense. And their view at the moment is that, well, for the time being, their investments are not into companies that do any of the actual weaponization and killing of anybody. They're there to support and help. But this certainly is, I think, an interesting topic that they could go into a lot more depth. There is obviously ethical problems around this. One important point then made by David Friedberg is that China is going to be a big player in this space. You see, China produces a huge number of drones and other parts, things like lithium-ion batteries, that are essential for production of these kind of war machines. And if the US had to go to war with China at some point, how would they outproduce China in this space? They could produce potentially, let's say, 100 million drones, and then what would the response be? So there are some national security interests here as well, which need to be thought of, and they may balance out some of the ethical considerations. An additional point I just want to make here quickly is that the advent of some attack technology is always pretty soon negated or neutralized by some defense technology. And that's how, historically, in warfare, things have proceeded, right? So you got something like bombers arriving in World War II, while then you have surface-to-air missiles eventually and weapon systems that detect bombers and then shoot them down. Right? And you continuously have this battle between attack and defense systems. So a lot of shifting into, as you see in this article, to defense against drones. And I'm pretty sure there will be some very powerful and effective defenses on the market pretty soon. And then maybe drones won't be so effective. So let's all imagine a completely terrible future where there is no protection against drones. Certainly, the companies that are investing in defense against them are going to have a great opportunity. Well, now I've come to the end of the review. So, questions first I want to ask is, who was the best of the besties? And that prize goes to David Friedberg. Well, he did a great job anyway of moderating when Jason wasn't there. We miss him. He chipped his tooth while eating a bison. So David had to take over for the session. Did a great job, but also gave some really great input. And I think on this episode, he was number one. And this week's winner of the best commentary goes to Chamath. He speaks about, in a very small segment, how he learned things about NVIDIA and how they're setting the standards in the market today compared with how Intel was doing that in the past. So have a listen to this.
The thing that NVIDIA does brilliantly is what Intel did in the 80s and 90s when they wanted to kind of choke the market for CPU competition, which is that they were able to define a metric that everybody started to pay attention to, which for them was clock speed. And if you remember, Intel would push Moore's law, and they would push transistor density and clock speed as the measurement of value. Now, for a lot of consumers, none of us knew any better. And so every time we saw a new chip, we would go through the Pentium upgrade cycle because we thought that's what we were supposed to do.
Unfortunately for Chamath, he's also getting the prize for the absolute worst piece of commentary. Now, he makes the argument that OPEC countries have been cutting productions to keep the oil price high so that inflation stays high, so that Biden will be kicked out of office. Clearly, they want Trump, but I mean, this is a bit of a crazy conspiracy theory. I really don't think that they're cutting production, which helps US producers make more money, so that the government will change in Washington. No, Chamath, I don't believe in that. And adding a little bit of insult to that is that this is one of the worst charts I've seen in a while. Just have a look at the axis on the right hand side. It goes from 3.03 to 3.5, but it gives you the impression that there's been a huge shift and pull up in price of gasoline. Yeah, it would be a bit fairer to make this a full axis, and you'll see that it's not as dramatic. That's it for this week's review. Please go and watch the podcast if you like this. These guys have put in a tremendous amount of work. Love what they do. Looking forward to next week's episode. By the way, there's a conference, All-In conference coming up in September. You can go and register for that. You got to apply. You can only go if they let you. But I believe it's an incredible conference, so I really encourage you to go and do that. Thanks so much for watching. Like, subscribe, and all of that. And I will see you after the next episode.